What's the weirdest thing you believed as a child? Story 1. I think a lot of people probably heard this one growing up. It's illegal for your parents to drive the car while the light was on inside. I loved reading as a kid, and when it would get dark, I'd want to turn the light on inside the cab. Oh no, don't do that, we will get pulled over by the cops. Why did so many parents tell us this? Story 2. I believe the overflow holes in the sink led to the sewer, and the sewer had alligators, so I would splash water into the hole to tease the alligators, LMAO. Story 3. I thought that when they say you may now kiss the bride in wedding ceremonies, that the kiss itself is what made them married, so I basically thought any time two people kissed, if they were already married, they were after that. Story 4. Kind of NSFW, but I used to think my dad peed inside my stepmom. I told my older brother once that it was convenient if you were married because as a man, if you needed to pee, you could just do it inside your wife. My brother only smiled, and told me that's not how it works. Story 5. I've had obsessive-compulsive disorder since I was a little kid, so there's a lot of weird things I believed. If you eat certain food item, everyone you love will die and it will be your fault. Hold your breath when passing the cemetery, or you'll inhale the spirits and get possessed. You will die any second. Go to the school office and call your dad at work to tell him you love him one last time. The house pet who only stays inside has rabies. You will die. The TV is watching you. You're in a Truman Show situation. This was a constant battle until I got put on meds at 23. Story 6. I thought the moon followed me everywhere because it liked me specifically. I used to apologize to it if I tripped or ran too fast so it wouldn't feel left out. Story 7. One time I was busting for a wee when my auntie was driving and asked her to pull into a motel or something. She pointed at the sign and said, "See how that says no vacancy? That means there's no toilets." I dead set believed this until I was 13 because I just took it and never thought anything of it. Oh. Story 8. I read a question-answer thing once about what cashiers were looking for when deciding about accepting a personal check. The answer included a line about the safest people to accept checks from were well-dressed men buying staples for years. I thought they meant literal staples like you'd put in a stapler. I was much older than I should have been when I realized they meant milk, bread, eggs, etc. Story 9. That I was talking to my grandma's cat on the phone when I called her. I believed the cat was really meowing back until I was like 14 and realized it was her meowing at me the whole time. Story 10. As a child, I took drinking and driving literally. Being 4 or 5 in the backseat of my aunt's car and watching her drink a McDonald's pop sent me into a panic. She thought it was hilarious but kindly explained to me it meant alcohol and driving, LMAO. Story 11. That a fat man with a white beard would travel on a flying sleigh with magical deers and a big sack with enough presents to gift to all nice kids, managing to fly so fast as to deliver all the gifts as ordered by the kids, while having to crawl in and out of chimneys, drinking around 200 milliliters of milk and eating 4 cookies at each house, leaving behind coal to all the naughty kids. That is a lot of coal. Story 12. I used to believe that cars automatically started moving when the traffic light turned green. I realized that wasn't true the day someone honked because we weren't moving at the green light. Story 13. That the US was worth giving my life, health and mental stability for. What was I thinking? At a centennial parade they had a large group of people in Victorian clothing. I swore they used a time machine to bring those people from 1866 back for the parade. Story 14. My mom tried to explain how a baby is made in kid terms. She said there's an egg, kinda like the size of a little peanut from the mom, and there's something like a fish from the dad, so when they meet up inside mom's belly, it makes a baby. I thought that's why we don't mix nuts with fish in our cooked dishes and eat them. Story 15. When I was about 4, my mom told me she was the woman in the video for Meatloaf's I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. Believed that for most of my childhood. Story 16. I grew up in Minnesota and there was a commercial that had some distinct animations of workers renovating the inside of a home. They advertised this as floor-to-ceiling service. I thought for probably a decade that floor-to-ceiling services were desirable across the United States because obviously Florida has a lot of rain and hurricanes, so of course they know how to seal a home up. Story 17. That when we went to Epcot we were really visiting all of those countries. I was like 6 or 7, and wasn't a bright kid lol, and with my typo, not a bright adult either lol. Story 18. I went through 2 years of poo retention ages 3 to 5, because I firmly believed that it was not just possible but likely that I could out my vital organs. Story 19. When actors on a TV show got married, I thought that ceremony meant they were married in real life. Silly kid that I was, knew they were actors but had no idea about marriage licenses and whatnot. Story 20. In the 80s, I thought the song Gloria was about my Aunt Gloria. My aunt was a quiet lady, in her 50s, I was very impressed such a popular song was written about her. Story 21. I believed that when you get married you get pregnant, then your husband was sent to a war. My mom heard me mention that when I was 10-ish, and asked why I thought that, because it wasn't true. Well, my grandparents got married, mom was born, and papa sent to WW2, he was gone almost 3 years. My parents got married, I was born, dad sent to Vietnam, I was 2 years and change when he came home, mom got pregnant again, and it seems I was stressed, probably because I thought it meant dad would ship out again. I was born on base and so was my sister. All of our little friends had a parent in the service who also sorta came and went. So the chain of events seemed to support my understanding. I was pleased to be wrong because not wanting my husband at war because they didn't always come home, even when they did, a part of them too often did not. Story 22. I thought people came out of the womb fully clothed. Since everyone always had clothes on and treated being naked like it was weird or temporary, I also thought that my dad was older than my mom because he was bigger, so he must have been born before her and started growing first. In a similar assumption based on anecdotally observed correlation, my 3-year-old was telling me that he still had his name because he didn't grow bigger like me, but when he gets bigger then his name will be Daddy like me. While explaining it, he was clearly sad but accepting of the fact that you have to give up your name at a certain size and have to go by Daddy or Mommy depending on your gender. Story 23. I thought people buried would be perfectly preserved so I could dig them up and see people from the past, dressed in old-fashioned clothes with jewelry on, etc. Basically I thought they were like wax statues, but I had no idea what a wax statue was. I wanted to dig up graves so I could look at people dressed in Victorian clothes or medieval outfits. The other thing I didn't understand was that when was explained to me, nobody explained there was any kind of motion involved, nor how long it lasted, nor different positions, so I just pictured a heavy man on top of me forever and it didn't sound fun at all. It sounded boring and I couldn't understand why everyone seemed so obsessed with it. Story 24. When I was really little, I would cry whenever anyone blew a bubble with their bubblegum as I thought it was their insides coming out. I'd also cry anytime someone ate a Snickers bar because I thought the caramel was snot. Story 25. As a kid, I believed that if you swallowed a watermelon seed, a watermelon would grow inside your stomach. I was honestly terrified of accidentally swallowing one. I thought I'd wake up one day with a whole plant coming out of my belly. Imagination was wild. Story 26. I thought things were bought with cash, so when I just saw my parents use a credit card and not exchange cash, I thought it was free for us because the credit card company was paying. A lot of times would be at a store and I'd want something and they would say no and I would tell them they could just use the credit card and they rolled their eyes. One time I saw my mom using cash to buy something and I asked why she didn't use the credit card so she doesn't have to pay for it. That's when I got a long lesson in how credit works. Story 27. There were monsters under my bed, but not under my little sister's. We shared a room, and our beds touched in an L shape. Somehow there was a boundary that they could reach through but not cross. My sister was very pleased to hear that. She was less pleased when I crawled across her to get back into my own bed. Story 28. My bed was pushed up against the wall, and I would sleep as close to the edge away from the wall as I could because I thought skeletons would come up from the wall side. I have no idea why I had that fear, but it was real, and lasted for a while. Story 29. How metallic ships float. I know that metals sink in water, but balloons do not. Therefore, logic dictates that the bottom of a ship must consist of balloons. Added believe is the ships moving in water is achieved by those balloons rolling like a tank's belt. Story 30. When I first started watching Donnie and Marie Osmond, I thought they were husband-wife, not siblings. I thought Marie married into the singing family. Story 31. So, pollution causes holes in the ozone layer, right? And littering is pollution. I thought that when you weren't looking, a discarded Doritos bag would float up into the sky and make a Doritos bag-sized hole in the ozone layer. I realized this wasn't the case when I was in the 4th grade and said it out loud in class. Story 32. That the music coming from our radio was a live band. I thought, how do they get all those people to play so many songs? Now this was radio only way before FM. Story 33. That if you had a non-visual knowledge horror-type bad guys can't get you, to mean in movies like Freddy Krueger, he always pops up behind you to reveal when you look. If you know he isn't there for sure, he can't be there. So like if you turn over in bed, if you put your arm behind you, there's no space for the bad guy to appear. Story 34. That outside had a specific sound. It tinkled like a little bell. I later realized it was the chimney swifts chirping as they soared around. They're gone now with the catastrophic collapse of insect life. They have no food source. When it's quiet, I still hear them. It must be some kind of ancient memory tape. Even that will die when I do. Sol good. Story 35. UK. Aged around 5, I was accompanying my parents around a furniture store, a set of furniture I liked. I reached into my pocket for the correct change and made my way over to the till. Through this attempted transaction I discovered that it's called a 3-piece suite, not 3-piece suite. Story 36. My mom would always tell me when I was a kid that if I didn't dry my hair properly, the water would seep into my brain and make me insane. It took me until 9 years old to realize that, along with about 1,000 other stuff my mom said, was BS. Funniest part is, my mom wasn't the type of lady to lie about that type of thing to kids. She genuinely believed it. Still does. Actually, she's also not the type of person who believes she could be proven wrong by someone younger than her. Story 37. If I turned on the fan vent thingy in the bathroom, the gremlins from the 1984 Gremlins movie would climb through the vents and kill me. However, every time I flushed it would reset them. Story 38. My mother was diabolical in the best way. She told all of us kids, including the neighborhood kids, that when you lost a tooth, if you didn't stick your tongue in the hole, it would grow in a gold tooth. It was the 70s. We believed anything. Story 39. 2 things. 1. That thunder came from 2 clouds bumping into each other. I knew it was true because that was what my dad told me. 2. That I had been ill with T-vitis. I was poorly when I was around 5 years old. I couldn't lift my head off the pillow and felt terrible. When the doctor came to see me, he noticed that we had acquired a TV set and told me that I must have been watching too much and caught T-vitis. To my enduring embarrassment, I told an adult about this when I was something like 13 years old. She looked at me funny. I didn't know why. When I caught the Hong Kong flu in the late 60s, all of the awful pieces came together. It is my very firm belief that adults should never lie to children. not even little white lies or silly jokes. Kids look up to adults, believe them to be infallible, place their trust in them. There is something lost when the truth comes out. Story 40. I used to think Jesus came to life every Easter and visited different neighborhoods. I grew up in a non-religious household. This was based on my understanding of Easter and a little prayer book for children that my friend owned. The book had an illustration of Jesus just chilling with a bunch of kids in modern clothes. Story 41. I thought ATMs printed money. It didn't occur to me that banks may have had something to do with them, or that the amount you could withdraw was limited to your bank account. Story 42. I genuinely, though everything I was watching on my TV was happening right inside my TV as I watched it. Of course we had a massive box TV, and 4 years old me figured it had to be there for a reason. Story 43. I used to believe actors could speak multiple languages, as in there weren't any synchronizations done. They just had to do the scenes each time in a different language. Story 44. My 7-year-old was telling me a few weeks ago about all the rocket trails contrails in the sky. I kind of liked his idea of a world with rockets flying around every day. Story 45. I firmly believed that giant crabs lived in the little ditches between the roads and houses. I was horrified. If me and my parents were walking past them, I would make them be quiet because I was convinced talking would wake the big crabs. For context, I live in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. We have crabs. But we do not have land crabs that walk the towns and cities. My family still has no idea why I was so scared of drain crabs. Story 46. I once wished to climb a cloud which I saw on a little hill. As I was in the peak of the hill, I realized the cloud is above the next hill, and I just have to walk up on this hill to finally climb the clouds. But I was feared to run too far away from home and decided to do not because it could bring worry to my mom and let it be. Story 47. I didn't really get weddings. I thought there was literally a 50-50 chance that either person would say yes. I didn't get that the engagements were usually long and both people already knew they wanted to get married. So when the priest would say do you take and the person would say I do, I would be so relieved. Story 48. I thought cigarettes that had an orange filter was for women and the white filters were for men. Also when I was 4 to 5 there was an Asian woman holding an umbrella in the sun, and I asked my mom why she was holding it, and my mom said it's only raining on them, and I believe it. Story 49. That giraffes came under doors. Yes, the tall animals. When I was little, like 2 to 3, mom would always say don't lay in front of the door because of the draft, but I heard giraffe, I know, dumb. Story 50. When I was a kid my cousin told me that inside every popcorn kernel there's a little devil, and when you heat him up he gets mad and pops, and that's how we get popcorn. Believed it for years. Story 51. Was always told that eating raw potatoes would give you worms. I imagined earthworms crawling around in my stomach when I was a kid, still afraid of raw potatoes. Story 52. That people just naturally became the opposite gender as they grew older. I honestly believed I'd grow up to be male, that's just what happened, like a seahorse. Clearly I was way ahead of my time, and still happily female. Story 53. Every time my dad turned off the TV, he would say that it was time to give the TV a little rest. I thought that the TV had a finite amount of power and that it needed to recharge itself. Story 54. My 4th grade teacher spoke with a lot of authority and was a little scary. She told us that the Russians had satellites all over and were watching us and that my small town was on their list of top places to nuke because of IBM. I used to yell at the sky thinking I was being surveilled constantly. Story 55. That there was an invisible man living in the sky who watched everything I did every second of every day, who had a special list of 10 things he did not want me to do, and if I did any of these 10 things, he sent me to a special place to burn and suffer and bleed and cry, forever and ever until the end of time, but he loved me. How stupid was I, Story 56. I'm going to give context first because it sounds awful. I grew up in a very white community, exceedingly white, and I had a black foster sister. She was deaf and went to a school for the deaf. All of her friends happened to also be black and deaf. So in my life, every white person I interacted with could hear and speak and every black person I interacted with couldn't. Cue the first time I met a black person who wasn't hard of hearing. She greeted me and asked how I was doing and I panic screamed, "You can talk," and that's how my mom discovered I thought all black people couldn't speak. Story 57. My bed was against the wall. If I was facing the wall, the monsters could get me, but if I was facing away from the wall, the monsters were afraid of my bravery. Story 58. I thought that when you were checking out at the grocery store and the machine asked you if you wanted cash back, that it was offering you free money. My mom cracked up when I asked her why she wouldn't take free money. Story 59. That clouds brought night. There always seemed to be clouds on the horizon at dusk. I don't know, it just made sense. I don't even remember when I stopped thinking it. It wasn't like it was something I learned otherwise about. It just disappeared. Story 60. That all families owned their own business. No, despite how pretentious that all sounds, my family owned a single mom and pop pizzeria. And I had very few friends whose parents also happened to own their own modest small business. I wouldn't say I was a dumb kid, just sheltered. Story 61. Most people that lived in Texas wore cowboy boots, hats, and used horses as transportation, and in reality I've seen it more in rural Indiana Amish than I ever did in Texas. Story 62. That some weirdo with wings and a wand came into my room at night, and traded me a few bucks for the tooth I lost earlier that day. WTF, kind of acid-laced fever dream of an idea, even is that. Story 63. Detroit was another part of New York City. My dad would often do day trips there, and would talk about having to go to Detroit in the morning. He worked in Manhattan. I just thought it was another borough of NYC. Story 64 is when you touch fronts that if you get bitten by 2 ticks you drop dead. Thanks Grandma. I got one when I was 6 and I was absolutely terrified of them for the next few years. Story 65 So many things. Before cars had seatbelts I used to lean on the back of the front seat to look out the windshield. I noticed that just before my father would turn the car a little arrow would blink, and I wondered how the car knew where you were going but was relieved that it did so you didn't have to worry about getting lost. That fear of getting lost was based on overhearing my mother talking to a neighbor about various stuff I didn't pay much attention to until I noticed she was discussing the sibling that had died as a baby before I was born. I knew she had existed and was no longer around but my parents never talked about it. I was too young to understand euphemisms, so when she said after we lost sibling's name I was horrified that they had stopped looking for her, and after that I was terrified to get lost because I thought no one would look for me. When we learned the 10 Commandments in Sunday school, they never really went into detail about what they were, and I assumed adultery meant pretending to be an adult, and was saddened to learn that playing dress-ups was considered a sin. Story 66 That random chairs could be electric chairs, and that landmines could be anywhere. I saw a few news stories and didn't understand the context. I was an anxious kid. Story 67 Jesus. I prayed to him before going to bed about 2 or 3 times before my 7-year-old self thought this is ridiculous. What am I doing? And stopped, and yet most adults nowadays. Story 68. I thought that if I had to pee really bad and I ate something it would absorb it. I also thought if you drive faster it would be less time and miles to get there. Story 69 Some kid at my church told me that if I ate a marshmallow off of the ground I'd grow hair in my throat. I'm pretty sure he just wanted the marshmallows to himself. I obviously know that's not true, but I still want to eat any marshmallows that have been on the floor. Story 70 That the second wife husband was always the step-parent. My uncle was married before, and I automatically assumed she was my cousin's mom, and not my aunt. That was not the case. They're all older than me except one. So I thought all of the drama happened before I was born. Story 71 Women give birth via their butthole. Some neighbor girls, when I was 8 or so, were talking secretly. One of them must have just got the talk from her mom. I kept begging them to tell me what they were whispering about. Finally one said babies come out of a lattice, but, at the time it seemed to make perfect sense to me. Not till a few years later when me and some guy were looking at a magazine stolen from his dad did I learn the truth when he pointed to a woman's vagina and said that's where you put you then later the baby comes out. I thought everything on TV was real, and that anime or cartoons were a realm to another dimension that we for some reason have footage of. I was 6 lol. Story 72 Read this to my wife. She said there was a girl down the street when she was growing up who had big nostrils. Her dad told her it was because she picked her nose. Story 73 I moved to a new area of the country. It was very rural, all country lanes and flowering verges. Someone at my new school said not to touch this particular plant because if I did, my mother would die. In fact, they all called it mother die. One time, I was around 10 years old. I was more than usually upset with my mother, and I went out and gathered great armfuls of said plant, brought them home and put them in her favorite statement vase. She didn't die. She didn't so much as catch a cold or sniffle. I was seriously disappointed. Story 74 I thought that in the olden days, life was in black and white because all old films were always in black and white. I remember asking my mum what life was like without color, and she was so confused. Story 75 I actually argued with my middle school science teacher about the color of blood with depleted oxygen. I trusted those red-blue diagrams, and though my elementary school experience was a better qualification than her master's degree. Story 76 When I was very young I was terrified of getting caught in the rain. Why? Well, after the rain there would be worms all over the street, the driveways and sidewalks. I erroneously concluded that the worms fell from the sky when it rained.